Okay, everybody, we're coming back from the break for our final segment of the show. If you've just tuned in, we do an hour-long show with multiple guests, different subjects, try to focus on business, politics, and economics. And I got a chance to talk a little bit about a book that I've written. It's available on Amazon, and you can find it in Rex, R-E-X, Parry, P-A-R-R-Y, Stop Economic Migration. It's basically a very short book about the economics and the history of answering the question why Canada looks like Canada and Mexico looks like Mexico. And this is quite an interesting story that gets overlooked by a lot of historians and economists. Now, let me give you a little bit of background. I love history. I'm kind of a historian and love going into how the Western civilization got developed. And let me start with the British Empire. And 1066, I know this is going to, don't glaze over on me, everybody. This is the Battle of Hastings, where the Normans invaded the island of England, and William the Conqueror took over. Now, a lot of people don't know this, but those Normans were Vikings. And a lot of people don't know that Vikings were not just interested in plunder, but they also were very interested in land. And the Vikings brought, along with the Romans, the concept of surveys, maps, and records of who owns what and who lives where. And this began a mapping system that we adapted here in the United States. I'll tell you a real quick story from history. Back in about 1277, thereabouts, there was, starting with the Crusades, and you had Richard the Lionhearted. By the way, if anybody's ever watched the Robin Hood movie with Russell Crowe, they actually touch on this very briefly. King John, who was the brother of Richard the Lionhearted, a little interesting tidbit of history. Richard the Lionhearted never put his foot on the island of England. Here he was the king of England, but he spent all of his life fighting in the Crusades and ended up passing away, dying. So his young, evil brother John got to take over, and there were a lot of bills that were left from the last crusade, and John tried to take the land of the barons. Now, these are the Knights Templar people. These are the barons that had fought in the Crusades. And he tried to take their land and liquidate it to pay off the debts that he owed to the Pope. And the barons weren't going to have it. So they came together as a fraternity. And the origins of fraternity really go back to the Masons and the Knights Templar. And they took a blood oath to support one another in unity and fight the king. And they ended up winning the battle, forcing King John to sign a piece of paper called the Magna Carta. And the Magna Carta becomes the foundation of our legal system. And it was all about land. And it made it so that there were restraints put on the king that he could not take your land, and he couldn't just arrest you and put you into prison without some sort of due process, habeas corpus. And this is the beginning of our civilized Western law society. Well, guess what? France, Spain, other countries never got that. So as we progress through history, we come into the Revolution, the American Revolution. And we had our founding father, George Washington, prior to the Revolution, was actually a surveyor. That's what they say in the history books. But in reality, he was a real estate agent. And people don't know this either, but that he would go out and survey property, and then he would sublease that property to tenant farmers. Or he would basically, lease the property. Well, turns out prior to the American Revolution, he went out to a piece of property that he had just surveyed, and there were squatters sitting on his property. And he realized that there was no legal entity to enforce his rights as a property owner to evict those squatters. And he ends up getting a letter around the same time from Philadelphia that says there's going to be this Continental Congress. And he thinks, this might be the beginning of forming some sort of legal entity to enforce property rights. And that was one of his motivations for attending, and the rest is history. Then we jump into the great President Lincoln. A lot of people don't know this, but in 1861, he passes the Homestead Act. And one of the reasons he was able to actually get that law passed is because all of the opposition were fighting against him in the South. And so they were able to get the Homestead Act where you could come out to beautiful Arizona. This is when this whole process was being laid out. The surveying process by the Army Corps of Engineers started way before. They had surveyors in Utah in 1847, 1848. The Army Corps of Engineers were surveying. In Arizona in 1870s, they got an intersection of baseline and meridian. So the next time you're driving towards Apache Junction out towards the Superstition Mountains, and you come to the exit that says Meridian, and you look to your right, which would be your south, you would see, if you get off the freeway, you can go find a monument out there. And from that intersection, that monument, all of the county surveying for Maricopa County and Pinal County begins from that point. And these are the beginnings of what gave us the invisible infrastructure that we just take for granted. And that is land, public records, and guess what? Mexico doesn't have any of this. South America, the Philippines, Africa, all of the developing countries that struggle year to year after the billions of money, dollars we put in trying to help these developing countries, they still struggle. And if you get a chance, go to Amazon Books, look up REXPARRY, Stop Economic Migration. And by having these maps, you're able to create collateral. The book explains the whole thing. Sorry about that, folks. I did a little bit of history, but if you study it, it's fascinating. We are extremely blessed to live in this country, and we have to understand the history and what brings us stability. Everybody, we appreciate you tuning in. We got to wrap up the show. My name is Rex Perry. Go to our website, 123bz.com, 123b as in boy, z as in zebra.com. Thank you.